What's up, listeners? This is Pete, aka Characters, and welcome back to the Carrot Poker Podcast. This is episode number 3 of the 100 hand sneak preview, in which format we go into the book. We pick a couple of hands, we bring a student onto the show and see what they think of it and get them to do some analysis for us, give them a little bit of help, and give you guys a flavour for what this book is like. So I have Anthony on the show with me today. What's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on, man?
It is all good. So we managed to fix your noise problem. You're like right in the middle of Manhattan right now, right?
Yeah, I had to move all the way down to the conference room downstairs. It's just people was laying on horns, it's narrow streets.
Typical Manhattan shit.
Out here.
Yeah, that's cool. A conference room in an apartment block, that must be like a nice place, right? That has to be like pretty baller to have something like that just in the building.
Oh, it's more like a study space. It's a college, so
okay, right.
Just moving to the place where there's a projector, it's part of the tuition, so
That's good.
It's okay.
You've got like your own little poker den. If people shouting and screaming at each other ever gets a little bit much, you can retreat there to do your poker stuff. I like
it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been to Manhattan actually, and I was just like, I remember walking around and just like, it took me like 5 minutes to walk from like one block to like the next block, and I was just like, I feel like I've been miniaturized and like put into a giant's world, and I'm like all alone in this world with all these people like just hustling and bustling past me. Kind of made me sad almost. Like I just felt like really weird for a second. Had to remind myself like where I was and that things are like buildings are 20 times bigger than in Scotland, and that's normal.
Oh, it's super surreal. And like, I think one of the weirdest things is, there's just so many people, like, there's so many people everywhere, but at the same time, if it can also feel just so lonely.
Yeah, totally.
Because these people, they don't even acknowledge you. Like, it's more respectful not to acknowledge someone or make eye contact or make small talk because, if you were to make small talk with everyone you met, you would spend your entire day making small talk. So it's a super weird city. And I'm from, like, the Midwest suburbs of America, and it's literally the opposite.
yeah, it's not far from
everyone's there friendly,
Yeah, totally. Cool, so we're going to like try and keep this one a bit shorter than the one I made yesterday, which ended up going on for like an hour and 20 minutes. If we do that today, my girlfriend will come home, the dogs will go off their heads and start barking, and it'll like ruin the whole podcast, so at least we have some kind of time limit to prevent us rambling today. Jack, the guy that was on last time, me and him just got into all these like meta discussions about stuff that wasn't even poker, so we'll try and keep it a bit more 100 hands related today. You had the very difficult decision of what two numbers to give me between 1 and 100, and you settled on 12 and, 42?
Yes.
And I have the hands right here, so I guess we're going to kick off with hand number 12. If you guys haven't seen this format before, there are another few episodes like this, or there's 2 other episodes like this with other students where it's the same format. We're just going to go through the hand. I'm going to ask Anthony to like explain the hand and what he thinks about it street by street. I'm going to give feedback on a street by street basis. As you guys all know, if you're regular listeners to this podcast and have seen the latest 2 episodes, this is a book with 2 types of hand. There's like orangey hands that are played by myself, or I've created as myself as the hero, and then there are green hands that are played by the student. It was quite funny. We had Jack on yesterday, or last week, I guess it'll be for you now, and he was like, he emailed me like very respectfully, and he was like, what's going on in this hand? Like, what are you doing? I don't understand it. And I was like, oh no man, that's not my hand, that's the student's hand. Like, it's okay to tear that apart. It's not played by me. Like, it's okay. And he was like, thank God, I hate the way this hand is played. And I was like, okay, that's cool. But these 2 are played by me, so you have to be like very, very careful of what you say. I'm very touchy, obviously, and I will fly off the handle if you insult my play. So, So first one, I'll let you just sort of go through the action here and talk to listeners through what's going on in hand number 12.
All right, so we are playing 50 Nolan with Zoom Poker Stars. That's not really relevant, but I guess it speaks to the competency of some regs.
Right.
So, full to the button, we got a 2016 reg. The 7's a 3-bet, right?
The 7 is the 3-bet. The red number is always the 3-bet in these hands, but I'll explain all of that when I write the intro to the book in a couple of days.
Sorry, it's not relevant. The stat's not relevant for this.
Not really.
This hand, it's 2016, so it's relatively tight for a 6-max. I'd say, I guess he's not opening that aggressive. He's probably opening like around 40% on the button.
Yeah, that's fair. Yep.
that's, if he's positionally aware, which I assume he is, given that it's 15-11 Zoom. Okay, so reg min opens to 2 big blinds, $1, and we are in the small blind, 100 big blinds deep. By the way, and we wake up with ace king of hearts, and we 3-bet to 350, 7 big blinds. I personally would. I guess this is a recent development in the Nolan Hold'em world. You probably would 3-bet bigger out of position.
I would these days, actually. Yeah, it's kind of funny that I guess this hand is I just scoured my database for different filters to get a different array of spots, and some of them are kind of older hands, and in a few of them, I feel like my sizing is not quite right, as it should be in the modern game or whatever. So it's a really good point. Yeah, 350 is the kind of sizing I would use against somebody who just under-defended and overfolded and justified that basically against someone who flats a lot, as happens in the modern day. I think you're definitely going to be sizing up out of position and making it worse for them to peel and realize implied and pot odds. They're going to do a good job of realizing implied odds to the sizing of only calling another 250, having opened for 1 with the dead money from the big blind in the pot as well. So this is way too small, definitely. It should be 450 or something like that. So yep, well pointed out. I am not infallible. Most of these hands I think I've played okay, but some of them there are little in-game blips or things that I note in the book that the sizing could be bigger or whatnot in these little situations. So agree with that, yeah. So reg calls, we go heads up to the flop, and what do you think there? Take us through the flop action and your thoughts.
Right, so flop comes king of spades, and then king 5 of diamonds. So king 5 with 2 diamonds, the king of spades.
And we have, so we said what we actually have here? I don't know if we have ace king of hearts. I don't know if we mentioned.
Oh yeah, we have ace king of hearts. Yeah. We smack it. So I guess I'm at the point where I'm still pondering a lot. Probably one of my weakest parts of my game is the out of position c-bet.
Sure.
No, actually, it's not. Since I've done a lot of work with it, it's become a lot stronger now. But I'd say it's 750 in the pot. Hero bets 435, about 60%, a little less than 60%. I guess that's more a polarized strategy.
No, not so much. I think it's kind of a range bet strategy. It's just a spot where we have ace king and he doesn't, and that just equates to a fairly big range advantage. So the fact that we're out of position, I don't think we need to size down that small in a spot like this, because our range is a lot stronger than villains in this kind of situation where we've 3-bet small blind and he's called button, because we should have pretty much all of the suited broadways and big broadways that he flats us with. We should share most of the kings, only we have aces and we have ace king and we have pocket kings and he doesn't have any of those hands. So I think it's a spot where the range advantage for hero and king 5, small blind versus button in the 3-bet pot is pretty severe and quite concentrated as well. So the bigger sizing there is all it's really doing is ensuring that when I triple, and actually when I polarize later, the pot will be big enough for stacks to go in, and I don't think I lose that much value by range betting bigger than normal there, and I am betting my whole range, as you probably would imagine in a spot like this.
Okay, so wow, that's never seen that. That's a really big size for a range bet.
435 into 750.
That makes sense. That makes sense given that we have a concentrated range advantage, and yeah, we have nut advantage. We have equity advantage. This makes sense.
It's funny. It's what Pio tends to do now. Pio Solver is, when I say now, I guess it's always done it since it was updated to be GTO co-optimal or whatever. But it's it does weird shit. It's in position and there's a dry board and it's a 2-bet pot and it bets pot size with its whole range or close to its whole range, because it's I have such an advantage, I will just maximize this now, there's nothing you can do, haha. That's the kind of way it thinks. So I guess in some spots like this where I'm really enjoying a nice concentrated range advantage, I kind of size up, especially when it'll help me actually max out and get stacks in, I guess. But you could go smaller. I don't think there's a huge EV dip or gain in the strategies of betting 3 here and betting 435 here. I think they run fairly close together. It's also worth pointing out we don't have loads of protection hands here. We do have some pocket pair combos. A lot of them are not that vulnerable. The ones that are not that many combos. So I don't think our range is betting for pure protection often enough to care about sizing really small here. I think in spots where our range is more protecting ace highs and things like that, it makes a lot of sense to size down because you lose to way more hands. But here our protection hands are good like a lot more often, so there's less downside to like betting big with them. You could make an argument along those lines, I think, for the sizing.
Okay, so we got, it makes a lot of sense. So kicking 5, go for 35. We bet range here. So really the question is, are we using a polarized or a linear strategy versus the reg in pre-flop?
Linear, definitely in the small blind. We're going to refrain from having a flattening range until we know about big blind. So big blind's unknown, therefore developing a flattening range in the small blind that's a necessary precursor to being polarized. So if we don't have a flattening range, we can't be polarized. So we are linear here, not because we think the reg is like a station, just because we think in the modern day people call a lot, and in the modern day people squeeze a lot in the big blind, so flatting is just not an option, therefore polarizing is not really an option either. Because like this is a thing people need to understand, like when you play a polarized range, there has to be something that separates your value hands from your bluffs, right? And that can't be a folding range, because that would make no sense to 3-bet ace king, fold ace queen, and 3-bet ace jack. That would be like nonsense of a strategy. So the polar range demands that there is a flattening range, and if there's not a flattening range, polar isn't even on the cards. It's not even on the table as a potential strategy in the first place, which is why, we're defaulting to linear here out of the small blind. But you know what? Even if I'm big blind these days, like in the modern era, like by that I mean like the last few months, because that's how fast poker evolves, I think I would be linear anyway, because people they're just flatting so many more 3-bets now than they ever were in the past.
All right. So, I guess flop is pretty covered then. So we bet range with flop.
Yeah, let me see if I can find a quote there on the flop, just because this is like kind of in the spirit of the format of podcast, right? Let's see. So I've said here, like, we have this range advantage residing in the fact that we have ace king, king king, and ace ace, where villain can't. I've said this advantage doesn't seem massive, consisting of just 14 combos, but it is very concentrated in a range that is only 212 combos is like my default like size of 3-bet range, compared with the 600 that we're used to when we open the button. So 212 might seem like a big range, but compared to like a button opening range, it's really not, so it's worth pointing out that dilution is like 3 times less. That range advantage dilution is 3 times less. It's 3 times more concentrated, that's to say, when we're in this spot compared with when we're just in a 2-bet pot on the button or something like that. Okay, let's move on to the turn. So what happens there, and what are your thoughts on this street?
All right, so turn is 5 of spades, so it's king, king, 5, 5. There's 2 flush draws, but they don't seem too relevant. And the hero checks, button bets 650, which is around a little over third.
Yep.
We check raise about 2.5x. So really interesting strategy here. Where did I write down? So obviously when we can definitely consider range checking here, because we have a ton of hands we want to check, like queens through 6s if we have a linear strategy, which we're all going to have.
Yep.
Queens through 6 is definitely going to want to check.
Can we explain range checking just for the listener as a theoretical term, just before we get into that too much?
So basically range checking means you're going to be checking your entire range. I mean, this is pretty straight up, because for a couple of reasons, maybe because, for example, considering a polarized, like if you continue to bet kings here, if you bet all your kings and you check all your queen 6s and, your high cards, you're going to get super exploited, because then your villain knows that whenever you check, you don't have a king, and then he can just abuse you really hard.
Yep, can overbet and shove rivers and all kinds of horrible things like that. And also what you said here, like there's just so many other hands that just really hate betting. Like, what if we just have ace X, which we have a ton, right? Like, we've not filtered our range at this point on this king, king, 5, 5 board. We've bet all of our linear range we just have literally like the top 212 discounted by the board combos here. And then we get to the turn and we just still have all those hands. We have all this ace X and all these hands that villain would have folded, some of them on the flop, especially to our larger size. So is it fair to say, do you think, that we actually, on this kind of turn, having been called on the flop, we move towards having more of an equity disadvantage than an advantage against villain's range?
Because villain's range has been filtered, we have not.
Exactly.
Is that
precisely?
Yes.
He's called the flop and we've not filtered.
Then I would agree.
Yep. Okay.
And also like in terms of like, just human playability, since we're not all just, raw equity and all that.
Of course.
Like, it's just our hands just play much better as a check, It's so was that your thinking at the time?
Yeah, so I'll
You
quote
wanted
you
to have
some
a range
passages. Yeah. So pretty much I've said here range checking, so this is a quote from the book. Range checking has a few nice strategic benefits, so good job to you for identifying that. I go on here. First, it keeps our checking range totally uncapped and draws another bet from villains' showdown valueless flop floats, which are mainly flush draws and backdoor draws. The point being that if we barrel the turn here, he's going to fold like all of them, and therefore when we do have a king, we get like no value against that part of his range at all, which doesn't seem very good. Secondly, I go on here, we can still get a second street of value from ace-x, and the likes of 8-8 by betting river and getting 2 more streets is probably ambitious, so the point there being we probably only get 2 streets against that kind of range anyway, so betting turn doesn't make a lot of sense. If we can benefit by checking it, we may as well wait to the river to get our second street. Thirdly, I've actually got 4 reasons for range checking here. Thirdly, villain simply has far more king X than we do now due to the narrowing of his range after we bet the flop and he called. He's got like all the Broadway kings, whereas they're now a more concentrated part of his range than they are of ours, even though we still do have ace-king, which, evens it up somewhat. And finally, our lack of position, as always, makes building the pot less enticing, not with our hand, and this is the distinction, because people often think, well, of course it's enticing to build the pot, you've got, like, the nuts, for God's sake, but that's not what we're talking about here. When I say that, I very much mean that our range is rarely happy about building the pot anymore here. It's usually got some kind of showdown value and really hates betting, like aces, ace-x, queens, etc. Just all these combos that really don't want to bet. So, yeah, Anthony, basically what you said, my reasons there, they built on that a little bit, and that just goes back to something that I was saying yesterday to Jack when he was on the show. I was saying, good job with your analysis, because you and Jack are both like pretty like competent students in my eyes. I was like, good job, but here's some more like food for thought that you may not have considered at the same time, which is quite nice, because it's like even if you do a good job in a hand and you solve it well, the essays that are written as the analyses of the hands in the book will often, they'll praise you while building upon your thought process and mentioning things that you didn't even consider. So that's the idea. That's why I made them really thorough, so that if someone does like solve the spot well, there's still food for thought there and still ways that they can build their strategic reasoning, even if they got it right.
No, that's those are all like reasons, like at least a couple of reasons were like in the back of my mind, but definitely this is why I'm like very excited to, see this book, because, it's definitely going to reinforce bring some reasons more towards the conscious part of my mind,
right.
Some good reasons and some good thought processes. Yeah. It's definitely makes a ton of sense and really good, solid reasons.
Yeah, and that's like the thirst that you need, because I remember when we started working together, one thing that I always remembered about coaching you was like I would say something, and you'd be like, hold on, that sounds ridiculously good. Let me just make sure I can understand that fully. And that's a good attitude to have as a student, to actually say, these sound like amazing points, let me just take a second to get my head around them totally, because that sounds like gold. You used to say that, and I used to feel like, okay, that makes me feel like good about my explanation. And that's important, because sometimes people read something or they listen to something and they just half take it in, think that sounds cool, but they don't wrap their head fully around it. So that's a good part of like reading this book, is making sure that you do understand those things fully, even if you were right about the hand. Absolutely.
All right, so I guess the more interesting spot is now determining what hands we're going to check raise and what hands we're going to check call.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, first off, see this idea of check raising. I don't actually know if it's balanceable or optimal to try and balance it. I have a feeling that the optimal strategy here might be to check call or check fold and not have a raising range. The reason I chose to raise is just that, like you say, we're humans, and in practice, people will bet like pocket tens for this small size on King 5-5 for protection, like more than they ever should, and they can get punished for that. I don't think there's much of a loss by having a raising range here, but is it like something the engine would do? Is it like completely optimal to have a raising range? I'm not so sure it is, to be honest. I just want to make that disclaimer first. In theory.
Yeah, you gotta watch out when the engine comes. I'm not sure, because I'm still I gotta build a rig to run Pio, So that's the point where I'm at. Like, I'm literally about to buy a computer just to run Pio.
Right.
So
yeah.
So it's I'll definitely be able to comment more on what the engine.
Yeah, I could be
may
wrong.
or may not do.
Right, I know I could be wrong about it either as well, but like I guess I'm kind of just from having seen how it treats spots, I think it doesn't normally give itself a range that's hard to balance when it doesn't have to. Like it might raise like a tiny amount at the time, but it would do what we could say is the human equivalent of not having a raising range, which would be to call like 94% of its range when it checks. So something like that. That's the kind of shit it does. So I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
For better or for worse, I don't know how good it is to have a raising range here in theory, because, you know, what is Villain going to bet call with? Like, what the hell is he going to bet call with that's worse than a king? Surely he'll just be checking back any hand that would have bet called had it bet, if that makes sense. Like, hands that would bet call that we beat don't bet in the first place. I guess that's what I'm kind of saying here, in the real world.
What, you mean like tens?
And, I mean, I think tens does bet, but I think, like, theoretically it probably shouldn't, ever. And that's why we shouldn't theoretically check raise ever. But, like I said, this is the real world, and humans make mistakes, and people do bet tens, so screw them, let's just attack them and try and stack them. I think that's a fair enough way to go about this.
Okay, so what factors should we consider that would make us more likely to develop a check raising range as compared to, like, you know, like what kind of villains would we be more inclined to develop a check raising range?
People with high float flop and float turn stats that just like to stab a lot. People with lower fold to C bets. People with higher aggression factors. People who just bet more, and just bad players that are just mindlessly aggressive. Like against an aggro fish, I think this is a great spot to check raise, just because they'll randomly bet call tens and then like call the river as well a lot. Against someone like really passive, like a more passive reg, probably by check raising all you're really doing is isolating like King X and blowing them off any bluffs that they will occasionally fire on the river. So it comes down to how likely Villain is to mindlessly bet the turn, in my opinion, and how badly he's going to play this spot and all the player type breeds that constitute that opinion.
Okay, so versus a reg we respect, we want to stick with a check fold, check call.
I think
strategy.
so. That's my feeling. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think it's right. Assuming that my assumptions are right about what is optimal for him to do, that's definitely what's optimal for us to do. I could be wrong about some of the way he should play his range, but I don't think so. I'm pretty confident in that.
Okay, so I guess next is analysis on, like, so shall we proceed with an assumption that this is how we're going to play the hand? We're going to check raise?
Yeah, we're going to play exploitatively and check raise the hand. I think there's nothing wrong with the turn raise, and I've actually said, to quote something out of the book here, I've said, oh man, where the hell is it? I'm very fond of my turn raise. It gives up relatively little against the aware balance reg, because I don't think it's a disaster to raise stuff. I just think it's not quite optimal, and does a much better job of making money from the more common opponent who has too much 10-10 here. And I've used 10-10 as like my example hand, because I think it's like the epitome of a hand that bad regs bet too much at like 50 NL.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So, okay. So, obviously, we're going to have kings in our raising range. And so, one of the biggest issues I'm having right now is how do we choose which kings we're going to be raising, or which kings are going to be check calling? Mm-hmm. I think to start, we want to be... Okay, so ace-king, we want him to have ace-high. Wait... This is where I get a little unclear, because it's like uncharted territory. Yeah, not because obviously you usually organize by stronger. Like, you know, you want to take more aggressive actions with your stronger holdings, and
right. But here it doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. So it's more about blockers here, right? Like it can't be about anything else. So what do we want Villain to have when we check call? We want him to have like Queen Jack, right? Because that's a float.
You want to have Queen Jack that he just bets river with again.
Exactly, that he just like checks, that he basically bluffs with twice or something like that because has no showdown. So we want Villain to have no showdown value when we are checking, and not when we are check calling, and not so much when we're check raising, right? So when we're check calling, we want to leave those kind of hands unblocked. So if we are going to split up our King X, which is not something we necessarily have to do, but if we are going to do that here, because I'm playing this kind of exploitatively against the population, right? But if we are going to split up our King X, Ace King leaves Queen Jack more intact, and therefore Ace King makes a better check call, because villain has pure air more often in that situation, whereas King Queen blocks Queen Jack to some extent, blocks his bluffs, and therefore makes a better raise against the likes of tens, which it doesn't block at all. Obviously, King 10 then blocks tens, which he should have, although he shouldn't have queens. And then we don't want to block tens when we check raise, because that's really what we're kind of targeting. So that's the way to think about it, is just use blockers and reverse blockers to try and solve that conundrum.
Yeah, so Ace King, King 10, I guess that's the extent of our kings that we're going to have.
That we're going to raise with here, yeah. Potentially. Although in practice, would I just always raise? I don't know if I'd raise King Queen. Maybe I wouldn't. I really like the idea of check calling that hand due to its blockers. So I think that's the selection criteria that we want to use, certainly.
Oh yeah, so that's a definite thought. And well, like, you know, I guess we were running it in the engine, probably Ace King, King 10 would come out ahead.
That would
because
have a
of
higher
this situation.
Yeah, it'd have a higher check call frequency. If there was a check raise range on the turn, I doubt it would ever contain those hands.
You mean King Queen or Queen Jack? I mean King Queen or King Jack.
I think the raising range would contain more of the. It would contain more of the King Queen and King Jack hands, because that would make villain's bluffs less likely, and you want villain to have a bluff when you check call, not when you check raise, right?
Okay.
So it would be the way. It's really easy to get confused here, because there's like so many like kind of double and triple negatives going on in the brain when it tries to make sense of this kind of spot. Like reverse blockers are like really like ahead, like they mess with your head. So yeah, like you've got to be like nice and careful about it when you're doing this analysis for sure. It's tricky stuff. Right, let's move on to the river just so we don't run out of time, because I want to get on to the next hand in a minute. Like really soon, actually, I want to get on to the next hand, or we're going to actually run into that situation where the dogs go mental because the girlfriend comes home and then it's embarrassing. So river.
Wait. I think we're maybe very quickly we name off some bluffs that we want to have. Obviously, Queen Jack suited.
Yes, stuff like that, like Queen Jack with a flush draw, that kind of thing.
Queen 10.
Yeah.
Flush draw, really?
Yeah, because the flush draw is at least like live against a hand like tens or something like that could bet call a turn. Occasionally.
Okay.
It's got equity against some of villain's bluff catchers, basically. Not all of them, but some of them.
So Queen Jack, Queen 10.
Yeah, you're going to favor...
and then we check call.
Yeah, you're going to favor like check raising equity to no equity, right? Like even if it's not much equity, because it's dead against a lot of villain's range, it's still live against some of it, so it's better than just having like Queen Jack off.
Okay, fair. Very fair. River. So, button calls. Mm-hmm. So he's even more narrowed his range. I guess the more station... I mean, I did calculations. We only have 26.65 left on the river on a $47.2 pot. Mm-hmm. So that's... I mean, it's pretty straightforward what we're going to do here because we have an extremely polarized range.
Yeah. Checking the river makes no sense at all, right? Because I actually say that in the book. The river's the 10 of diamonds, by the way. So the board is king of spades, king of diamonds, 5 of diamonds, 5 of spades, 10 of diamonds on the river. And just to quickly wrap this one off so I can move on, I've said here, so we can move on, I've said here in the river, when villain calls a turn raise, his range can be narrowed almost exclusively to subgroups 1 and 2 above, which were actually like hands like tens and stuff like that, and then like the nuts, which instantly rules out a river check by hero with his polarized range. Like, why would we ever check when villain has either the nuts or a hand that can only call and not bet? It just makes no sense, right? So clearly we have to just shove here with this hand. And with bluffs, if we think that villain actually... I don't even know if I would. I think in practice I'd just be like giving up a lot of bluffs because I feel like after they call the turn, they are King X weighted and they're under folding river naturally. So I think it's a good spot to naturally under bluff when you get here with a bluff, to be honest.
Okay, so naturally under. And I guess we're going to choose a bluff and be Queen Jack. So, that makes sense.
Of course, because of the blockers against King, Queen, and King Jack. Yep, it would be Queen Jack, but like, would I even do it? Maybe not. Anyway, let's go into hand 42. That's an interesting one anyway, where there's a lot of range building and thinking to be done. It's a cool hand. 42 is also another one of these hands where it's all about range versus range, reg versus reg, that kind of thing. Why don't you take us through the pre-flop action on this one?
All right, we got the same reg, 2016.
That is a weird
I mean,
coincidence, man. Because you literally gave me like 2 random numbers, and they were the only ones with this same guy in it. Wow,
insane.
that's cool. That's like freaking me out.
So let's see what we got. So if Volt's the cutoff, the reg's in the cutoff. He raises to $1. Min raises cutoff. Interesting. We Volt's to us in the big blind. We had 8-7 off, 8 of spades, 7 of hearts, and obviously you have to defend here. We're just getting like 3.5 exactly, I think.
Yep.
So obviously slam dunk defend.
Yep.
And I would say as a side note, we should probably even be defending like 10 deuce suited. You know,
Probably.
some maybe even 9 deuce suited. We'll see. Well, no, actually, let's say the flop, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, let's not worry too much about our exact range here. Like, I don't want to go into like our range is exactly these combos. Let's just say that it's somewhere around that borderline. We can agree on that. Yeah.
All right. So cutoff, min opens, we call. 8 of spades, 7 of hearts. Okay. So flop is 10 of diamonds, 9 of clubs, deuce of spades. So we flop in the bottom open ender. So, okay. So hero checks, obviously. Cutoff bets 2/3 exactly. So we have a decision here. Obviously this is a fine check raise, but I think we have so many other hands that we want to check raise and this is definitely a hand that has enough equity to check call.
Yep.
You know, like we might want to be check raising like our queen 8s, our jack 7s, our 8-6s, maybe even. I feel like our king jacks and our king jacks and king queens do fine as check calls. But also there is the blocker effect.
I think there's also an optimization effect, like where you need to like give yourself some of these combos if you do build a raising range here. Like you're gonna want to have like some king jack in it or some queen jack in it. You're not gonna want to just like never have those hands, in theory.
Oh yeah.
But what you do in practice, obviously, you could
choose.
simplify. But yeah.
Yeah, maybe we choose like the suited combinations and FBDFDs that we can continue blasting off on when we check raise.
Sure.
That
Things
probably
like
makes
this.
most sense.
Yeah, or just do it some frequency of the time or whatever. I just think the point is that if we do raise here, we want a decent like variety of bluffs in our check raising range. We don't just want all the same kind of gut shots or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. So we got 8-7, definitely strong enough to check call here.
And I mean, another thing
so-
here, just because a hand is strong enough to check call doesn't mean it can't be check raised as well. Like, we don't have to be like
for sure.
completely polar in that sense. And I've actually said here that, like, he's bet really large here, right? 150 into 225. And I've actually said on 10-9 deuce, that's not a board that you'd be like betting all the time on, right? If you're a villain.
So you mean large in terms of like a cutoff versus a big blind dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, he's betting like 2/3 of the pot on a
yeah.
board where I don't think people range bet all the time. So I'm thinking, like, if he's polarized, is it right for me to actually, like, if he's already polarizing, which he may well be, is it actually right for me to develop a raising range yet? I don't think so. I think against a polar range, like, you want to wait till the turn generally to protect your calling range and then do your raising on a later street, mainly the turn when you're out of position. Because if you do it on the flop,
Fair.
then you cap yourself against a polarized range, which is just bad, obviously. It allows them to overbet and things like that strategically. And secondly, against a polarized range, calling becomes better than raising because there's no merges to get like as thin value from as there are and when he bets like a merged kind of range bet range. So I've actually said here, developing a raising range on the flop is permissible, but less attractive against villains' larger sizing because the larger sizing, I'll paraphrase here, basically just makes it makes it more likely he's polarized, and secondly, it makes our pot odds like pretty unattractive. Or makes villains' pot odds unattractive as well, which means that there's less need to raise just to deny him equity as there is if he bets like a tiny range bet, then raising becomes like imperative, right? Because you're trying to cut back on like live cards just seeing 2 really cheap streets.
Okay, yeah, and also it's pretty hard to meet the minimum defense frequency.
Yeah.
Especially in the big blind. It's super hard to reach those frequencies, having to defend hands that like always hit the full to a second barrel.
Exactly, and then if you end up like capping your range when you call the flop against polar and he bets big on the turn, you end up just like really struggling to meet minimum defense and his bluffs are realizing loads of equity and it becomes a bit of a nightmare. So I think like keeping yourself uncapped against his large sizing is pretty sensible, at least as far as the flop goes. And then on the turn from there on, you want to range check every turn because he's polarized. That's your read, and then just develop a raising range at that point with like showdown valueless hands that need to do it, and then value obviously as well, like the nuts.
Okay, yeah. So let's move on. Mm-hmm. So we call. Turn is the queen of diamonds. So we have 10 of diamonds, 9 of clubs, deuce of spades, and then we have the queen of diamonds turn. So very interesting. And then we check cutoff checks behind. I think this is quite capping.
Oh yeah, very capping. Like there's no way that like King Jack can ever afford to do this. Like there's no balance argument in the world that can make checking back the queen of diamonds turn with King Jack in any way defensible. There just isn't.
Like I guess we can cap him. Well, actually, let's see the river first, since it's just check. So
check, and we would maybe check raise this 8-7 combo now, because this is a case of restricted choice with bluffs. Have you come across that concept before, like restricted choice?
No, I have not.
So the idea here is, it's kind of a bridge term, actually, restricted choice, but it works in poker as well, where we do not have enough hands that miss the turn to have a bluffing range if we don't bluff 8-7. That's kind of the idea behind it, because all the King Jack and King Queen aren't going to bluff raise the turn. The turn is a queen, right? So the only thing left that can really like check raise bluff now are the floats that are things like 8-7 and stuff like that. So it places a higher demand on 8-7 to be a more frequent raise, because it doesn't have alternatives in the same range that can like share some of that bluff frequency sometimes. Like it has to make up more of the bluffs itself, this 8-7, because its fellow flop floats have all sort of got there and it's not. So it's kind of left on its own, like needing to bluff, if that makes sense.
Oh, so because we have so little error when we check call on the queen turn, and so we might even have to start turning some deuces into bluffs, would you say?
Yeah, probably some deuces and things like that as well. That's the next part of our range. Although we probably have other floats like ace-jack and things like that we called flop with. Okay, maybe we 3-bet that pre actually, but maybe some things like backdoor draws that raise higher, or just something that we defended on the flop. Like we're going to have some of those floats as well. But maybe deuces is the next logical step. It's a 5-out hand with less showdown value than like pocket fives. If villain was range betting a range containing pocket fives, then we'd be losing with a deuce at showdown. So you're right, like a deuce is the next thing to go to if we need it, but we are going to have like loads of combos of 8-7 since we have all the offsuit variables of that. So it's probably sufficient to just raise like this hand. And then the only downside to that is that on a Jack River, you never have air, but this is now becoming so rare and obscure that it's not going to really matter to your EV in the big picture. It just becomes like such a branch of a branch of a branch of a sub-branch, and it's just like, who cares by that point? Like, you can't always give yourself complete and utter balance in every single situation, because the board can run out in ways that just skew someone's range like weirdly. And I'm not a fan of like trying to just seek symmetrical ranges in all possible permutations of turn and river cards. I don't think it's right. I think just like pick a solid strategy and raise 8-7 like almost all the time here is pretty good. You can have a lot of value combos to balance it as well. You probably do need to raise 8-7 like always here on the turn, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. We also, our draw gets pretty discounted. It gets pretty devalued on the queen.
It does, yeah, and I mean that
it becomes
sucks.
A lot less strong.
Yeah, that's true. It sucks, but like, what other draws do we have? Like, what else are we really gonna call flop with? It didn't. Like, the point is, our range just became like a Goliath on that turn. Like, it just became a monster, and therefore we don't really care that this is a low equity bluff. It's still, as part of our range, it's really high EV to raise it because our range is so strong. So our range is gaining a lot of equity when we add more 8-7 off to this raising range on the turn for sure.
Okay, so turn goes check. River comes the ace of hearts. So I guess villain's strongest hand is ace-10, possibly.
Or aces.
Oh yeah, aces definitely want to pot control.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess kings would be a more preferable bet because it blocks king jack and you have a gut trap and backup.
Yep.
So you would actually c-bet kings over aces here, like continue? I guess Kings is...
Kings also makes a better check call, though. Sorry, I was just going to say Kings makes a better check call as well by the same reasoning that when you check villain's now polarized when he bets, therefore the blocker against villain's betting range is actually more acute than the blocker against villain's calling range because the calling range is larger than the polarized betting range. So it's a kind of weird concept that I guess I would call something like concentration of blockers or something weird like that. Like we're getting into like the fanciest like modern poker terms I can possibly think of at this point. But you get the point, right? Like when villain actually, like when we actually check the turn and villain bets, if he bets big, he's repping really polar. That our king blocker is like an awesome check call now because it blocks the nuts from a smaller sub range. Whereas when we bet, he does have the nuts there, but he also has loads of other hands as well because we've not filtered him yet by checking and seeing him bet. So he's not filtered when we bet, but he is filtered when we check and he bets. Therefore, the blocker's more concentrated against his betting range, which is why I would actually check call kings. But that's a weird fancy concept, and it kind of goes beyond the level of what this book teaches mostly. This book's more advanced than Grounder's Manual, but it doesn't mean I want to get into like stuff that specific in all cases, although there is some of that stuff in there. It's not like commonplace or anything like that. So if you found that difficult to follow what I just said as a listener, don't worry about it. The book is more comprehensible than that for sure.
Okay, so I think what would be interesting to analyze quickly in this spot is, like, let's say we were villain.
Okay.
So would we want to double barrel kings here on this turn?
I would check call it for the reasons I just gave, that it's a more useful blocker when hero actually
but we're in
bluffs.
position.
Oh, I check back then and call it on the river, yeah.
Okay, so check block, call river.
Yeah.
What's the best hand that we want to check back here?
Probably some two pair for balance, just because the two pair blocks like a lot of the stuff we're trying to get called by. Like you can probably like make an argument for checking some two pair, but not checking a hand that's always getting three thick streets like King Jack. Now, you don't really want to get raised when you've got 10-9 here either. You have live outs against straights and stuff like that. Like I think checking some 10-9 is not a bad idea at all on this 10-9 deuce queen ace. But listen, let's move on because I'm going to have to wrap this up in like 2 minutes, okay? So let's go to the river and solve that before we leave off for today.
So river comes ace. I mean, we have probably one of the worst hands we can have.
Mm-hmm.
Probably almost exactly one of the worst hands we can have.
I think it's the worst hand we can get to the spot with. I agree with that. Unless we float like 3-4 of spades on the flop because we have like the 3-card straight draw with the deuce of spades or something like that. But yeah, we get the picture. It's like really bad. Yeah.
So river on the ace, he's pretty capped. I don't even think he has ace king because ace king has a nice bluff. I guess some opponents check back ace king, but and ace jack pretty much always fire. So
yeah.
I think we can go pretty huge. Probably not overbet. Definitely not an overbet because, or we can possibly consider splitting our range here.
Mm-hmm.
We have some stronger two pair, like some weaker two pair, some strong one pair hands like ace jack that wants to go for some big value, target some.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Jack 10.
Let me come in here just because I want to finalize this box, so we're going to have to call it a day. Sorry to be abrupt at the end of the podcast, but I have to go just so it doesn't get disrupted. So the point here is overbetting does work with some hands for sure because villain is so capped and we're so uncapped. So the more we overbet, the more 8-7 we're actually allowed to bluff because villain's pot odds get worse. And when you're bluffing bigger, you can use more bluffs because villain's price is worse, right? That's like the idea.
Mm-hmm.
So overbetting some hands definitely makes sense. Do you want to create a smaller betting range as well? Yeah, possibly. I think that's too big a topic to launch into right now. But certainly, with 8-7, I think that it's an okay... I mean, the blockers are kind of useless with it, but it's definitely an okay hand to overbet bluff with or put into the other bluffing range, however you want to construct that. What I actually advised here was I went for the coach's line here, which is how this format of hand ends when I've played it, and I went for hero bets 940 into 525, so pretty big. But listen, man, thank you for coming on the show. I need to cut it short there and
no problem.
let the outro music.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. I'll get you back on in the future. Good job with hand analysis. And yeah, so that's two like students you guys have just seen come on the show that have a very good idea of what they're doing here, and that's like not representative of like all of my students. They're all different abilities, but I thought you and Jack both did like really well. So hopefully that just shows like with some hard work and some coaching and dedication, you can bring your game to a level where you're capable of that kind of analysis. It's good. So, thank you for watching, guys, listening. You can get 100 hands from my website in a couple of weeks. Hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube, as you will actually get updates and videos will come out in this podcast that tell you when it's been launched. And you can just go into Carrot Corner as soon as it comes out and buy that book. Grinder's Manual is also on there if you have not read the theoretical textbook, The Grinder's Manual, that I made in 2016. Also on there. And yeah, stay tuned for more of this on a weekly basis until then, and then probably after that some kind of new format of podcast from that point on. Right, good luck at tables, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.